Dear listener, hello, and welcome to another episode of TDNY. This day, not year. The podcast that looks back at the history of the week ahead. And the week ahead for this episode is May 19th to May 25th, where we'll learn such things as who croaked in the Battle of the Frogs, why the Raspberry Girl was underground, how Rufus became a killer, what the heck graupel is, plus a whole lot more along the way. And we have our regular song pairings for each episode, and a quiz at the end, as incentive to pay attention to the stories throughout. Stories such as the one for Monday, May 19th. On this day, not year, midday turns to midnight. It's not a totally unknown phenomenon for daytime to be as dark as night. Solar eclipses are one example, as the moon passes between the sun and the earth, blocking out light. As a fun aside, if you Google solar eclipse, you get a neat little Easter egg of one happening in your browser. Another example of a dark day is one we have mentioned before on the podcast, polar night, occurring in the southern and northernmost areas on Earth, pitching the land into darkness for months at a time as the tilt of the Earth places those areas away from the sun. Our story today doesn't take place during an eclipse, nor did it happen at the southernmost or northernmost points. Instead, our story is from New England, a northern region of the United States that contains the states of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and that sneeze of a state that is Massachusetts. New England, as will become important later on in the story, borders the Canadian provinces of Ontario, New Brunswick, and Quebec. So file that away for a few minutes' time. The year was 1780, and New England was facing its 10th day of dry weather, with the red sun rising into what was described as a thick, smoky atmosphere. Although this day would soon prove to be very different to the prior 9. Around mid-morning, rather than the sun rising and shining down over the country, everything started to grow darker. John Horrigan, a modern historian, wrote of the event in his book, The Dark Day Over Old New England. Writing, by 10 a.m., the sky went dark. All over New England, every farmer, schoolboy, fisherman, maiden, cordwainer, blacksmith, clergyman, and labourer gawked upward for the missing sun, and gasped at the remarkable and sudden elimination of light. Others, from the actual time period, gave their own accounts. In some places the darkness was so great that persons could not see to read common print in the open air, stated Samuel Williams in his 1785 memoirs. Abigail Adams witnessed the darkness firsthand, writing of luminous clouds that gradually spread over the hemisphere till such a darkness took place as appears in total eclipse. By 11 o'clock, candles were lit up in every house. It grew so dark that many accounts report fowls retiring to roost. Birds were silent and disappeared. Bats on leathern wings flitted about. Cattle retired to the barns. And that frogs croaked. Frogs in New England had already caused their own panic 26 years prior in what had since become known as the Wyndham Frog Fight, or the Battle of the Frogs. Croaks of "Gin rum! Gin rum!" rung out through the small town of Wyndham one summer night, driving many to think it was Judgment Day, although the more sensible commented that couldn't be so, as it was still night, so couldn't be Judgment Day. Others thought the town was under attack and sent out scouting parties to find the enemy, while the militia readied itself, supposedly firing out into the night at the origin of the noise. When morning broke, the sound receded and the militia claimed victory, until the source of the sound was discovered. A lone, nearly dried-up pond, surrounded by hundreds of dead and dying bullfrogs, who had been waging their own war over the water source that night. So, when day suddenly turned to night over New England, and the frogs began croaking, I'm sure some people thought back to the Battle of the Frogs, and the incorrect assumption of Judgment Day, wondering if perhaps today wasn't that day after all. Timothy Dwight, in a historical collection in 1836, is quoted as saying, "A very general opinion prevailed that the day of judgment was at hand." The darkness lasted all day and night, with many noting that even the darkness of night seemed amplified, intensified. But the following day, the sun rose and was visible again, showing a country covered in black soot and ash. The cause of the sudden dark day, and the reason why it cleared, was a mystery for many, although some speculated the cause being a volcano, or a comet, or other heavenly interference. The real answer wouldn't come for centuries. Loggers in Ontario, Canada, found areas of forest that a large wildfire had swept through many years prior, with scientists eventually able to determine fire damage on tree rings that dated back to 1780. Joseph Dow, a historian, had noted, "Winds had spread the smoke over a very great extent of the country. On the morning of the 19th, the wind, though variable, was principally from the eastward, and brought with it a dense fog from the ocean." If you can remember back to episode 3, and the 1959 event that shut down London for the day, you may recall me telling you that smog, meanwhile, is a portmanteau of smoke and fog. And as the name suggests, smog is a result of smoke from factories, household stoves and fireplaces, etc., becoming trapped within the cool and damp fog-producing air. Which is essentially what happened over New England, only to such a degree that it managed to block out the sunlight and plunge the land into darkness. With all this talk of previous episodes and sunlight, it seemed a fitting time to check back in on Reflect Orbital, the company mentioned in episode 4, who wanted to be paid to reflect sunlight down to anywhere on Earth. While they still haven't really progressed any further since then, and the back and forth comments of "this is a scam" and "this is genius" seem fairly balanced online, the company, on May 15th, did receive $20 million in funding. So expect to either see their dream become a step closer to reality, or the company founder do a runner and buy himself a new house. My song pairing for this story comes from a movie, kind of. The song was cut from the final movie, as shortly before release the entire movie was chopped and changed, and the story went from a dark tale to a comedic one about a greedy ruler being turned into a llama. Yes, my song pairing, made for but not appearing in The Emperor's New Groove, is Snuff Out the Light, sung by the talented Eartha Kitt. Tuesday, May 20th. On this day, not year, the police were called out to a very cold case. Peat, as per Oxford Languages Dictionary definition on Google, is a brown deposit resembling soil, formed by the partial decomposition of vegetable matter in the wet, acidic conditions of bogs and fens, and often cut and dried for use as fuel and in gardening. Peat, as described above, was basically a fossil fuel for many areas around the world. If wood or other flammable materials were scarce, peat made an excellent alternative, although not a perfect one. As per healthywa.wa.gov.au, peat typically smoulders, a slow, low-temperature form of combustion, rather than burning with an open flame. This also means it produces a thicker smoke, containing more particulate matter. It's also what gives Islay whiskey its distinctive smoky smell and flavour that divides drinkers. Fortunately, the more that are put off by it, the more that remains for those of us that enjoy the dram. Peat, as per Oxford Languages Dictionary definition on Google, is... that's repeat. Moving on. So, why all this peat talk? Well, it's where we find ourselves at the start of our story today. In particular, we find ourselves in a peat bog in Falbygden, near the small town of Lutra in Sweden. World War II was raging on, and the supply of coal was uncertain at best. So, on this day, in 1943, Carl Wilhelmsen popped off to the bog and started digging peat. Something among the shovelful he'd just dug up made him stop. Stooping closer to examine, he found a hand. A skeletal human hand. Carl called the cops. The corpse could be the culmination of criminal creation. Fortunately for the police, this body was a little out of their jurisdiction. It had been discovered 1.2 meters, or 4 feet deep, meaning it had been there longer than Sweden had been Sweden. So the corpse case was instead passed off to the National Heritage Agency and expert Carl Iesus Salstrom. Carl, born 1884, was a geologist, archaeologist, and well regarded within the antiquarian circles in Stockholm. So the bog was boxed up, plopped on a train, and sped off to Stockholm, Sweden, and Carl. Fast forwarding a bit, a 2017 scientific study states several attempts have been made to date this skeleton. But I'd like to add, she currently has no body. Yuck, yuck, yuck. Sorry. It was discovered the body, which has since been nicknamed the Lutra Woman, or Hallonflicken, the Raspberry Girl, for reasons we'll soon see, died somewhere between 3,928 to 3,651 BC, making the body just a little shy of 6,000 years old, older than many Egyptian mummies, and the oldest known Western Sweden Neolithic human. In life, she would have stood 145 centimeters, or just under 5 feet at 4.9 feet tall, making her short even for the time period. At the time, It was estimated she was 20 to 25 years old before death, although a more recent study has revised that down to 15 to 20 years. Ironically, and well after her time, but in the 15th century, Pete was a word for a merry young girl, which may have described the Raspberry Girl. Pete in life, Pete in death. The Swedish University of Gothenburg released a study that found bogs and mires had been used as burial sites throughout Europe for millennia, and even recently up to the 18th century. Many of those found in bogs showed signs of violence, the Gothenburg Uni article stating, "In the past, the violence was interpreted as being due to human sacrifices, the execution of criminals, or that people have simply fallen victim to violence in other ways." Before continuing on, however, the study indicates that a remarkably large number of these individuals died by accident, or, in some cases, by suicide. So, what does that mean for the Lutra woman? Well, it's very likely she didn't wind up in the bog by her own hands, and that's due to how she was discovered. The body was found face down, arms under the body, and legs bent up against her behind. Elias Dar, the osteologist of the initial investigation, suggested she was bound, legs and arms tied, either before or after death, before being dumped in the water above the bog, drifting down to be left for centuries as her body was slowly covered, the water drying up, and she was left buried in peat. Others have agreed with this assessment, believing her to be a sacrifice or even an early witch execution. While some other, what are termed bog bodies, have been preserved with clothing, hair, and sometimes even skin, our Raspberry Woman was just bones, meaning if she had been bound, those bindings had rotted away long ago. The only organic material left was a mass where her stomach would have been, containing seeds which were determined to be from European red raspberries. Hence, Raspberry Girl. This also likely placed her time of death sometime during late summer, when the berries would have been in season. We'll likely never know the full story behind the Raspberry Girl, but if other bog bodies from her same era are found, they may help provide some answers on just how and why she ended up where she did. My song pairing for this story comes from the band The Presidents of the United States of America, as the opening verse was stuck in my head all throughout writing and research. Lump sat alone in a boggy marsh, totally motionless except for her heart. Mud flowed up into Lump's pajamas. She totally confused all the passing piranhas. The song Lump. Although, as a runner-up, Bog Bodies by Rabbitology is also a good pairing. Wednesday, May 21st. On this day, not year, Rufus kills. You've likely heard of Little Boy and Fat Man, the bombs dropped on Japan towards the end of World War II. But have you ever heard of Rufus? It was the nickname for the core of a third bomb that was being produced, should Japan not surrender. It was only to be used by direct command of the president, but due to the time restraints in producing the core, and the eventual surrender by Japan, it was never used, and instead kept in America for further testing. Just because it was never used, however, doesn't mean it never killed. While Little Boy was uranium-based, Fat Man and Rufus were both plutonium. Discovered in 1940 and named after the then planet of Pluto, plutonium by itself isn't too deadly, giving off alpha particles when it decays, which can't penetrate the skin, and so is really only dangerous if you decide to chomp down on it. However, if you introduce plutonium to some beryllium, then things start to get really dangerous. The beryllium acts like a reflector, bouncing outgoing neutrons back into the plutonium, which increases its criticality rate. Enough neutrons bouncing back, and it sets off a chain reaction within the material, releasing more and more neutrons. If that goes over your head as much as it goes over mine, think of being on an open field and someone throwing a bouncy ball at you. The odds are you can sidestep it and it will whiz by. That's the neutron. Now, imagine the same scenario in a small enclosed room. As the wall bounces off the walls, the beryllium, it becomes harder to avoid it, and every second keeps adding in a new ball, with more and more whizzing by. Eventually you'll be hit. That's the chain reaction of plutonium criticality. The easiest way to ensure neutrons cascade is to form the plutonium into a sphere, which Rufus was. Crafted as two hemispheres, and with a combined weight of 6.2 kilograms or 14 pounds, and an 8.9 centimeter or 3.5 inch diameter. Moving on from the science, that brings us to May 21st, 1946, and to scientist Louis Slotin. Born 1910, he would go on to die in 9 days, 30th of May 1946. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. Louis was a scientist on the Manhattan Project, the codenamed research into developing the first nuclear bombs, and on this day, he was experimenting on Rufus. Located in a secret lab in Los Alamos, New Mexico, was the room containing Rufus. On this day, it also contained Louis and several other individuals, including Alvin Graves, a scientist who was going to be replacing Louis, who was soon leaving to return back to a life of teaching. Louis was demonstrating a criticality experiment to Alvin, something referred to as tickling the dragon's tail, highlighting the danger involved. Slowly, 2 beryllium shields would be lowered over the sphere of plutonium that was Rufus. Much like our runaway train from last week, this procedure had several safety features that needed to be followed, least of which were 2 wedges that were to remain between the 2 halves of beryllium, to prevent them from fully closing and creating a runaway chain of neutrons. Louis wasn't using the wedges today, but Louis was a cowboy, often performing this same experiment in jeans and boots. Instead of the wedges, he would use a screwdriver to keep the halves separated. Today would be the last time he would perform this trick. 3:20 p.m. The 2 halves of beryllium closed around the plutonium sphere. The screwdriver had fallen out, and a burst of bright blue energy sped across the room as the sphere cascaded towards criticality. It had only been seconds, and Louis was able to pull the top half off again, throwing it to the floor. But the damage is done. Louis is stated to have said, "Well, that does it," left the room and vomited before being rushed to hospital. A gray, as per Wikipedia, is the unit of ionizing radiation dose in the International System of Units, defined as the absorption of 1 joule of radiation energy per kilogram of matter. 5 grays is usually the lethal amount for a human. Louis got double that, with 10. His body had been fried by the radiation, one doctor likening it to a 3-dimensional sunburn throughout his entire body. 9 days after the accident, Louis Slotin passed away. Fortunately for the others in the room at the time, they had avoided the worst of the radiation and weren't at any immediate risk from it. Rufus took on a new name after this accident: Demon Core. It wasn't the first death it had caused either. 9 months prior, another scientist had been working on Rufus when he too accidentally started a criticality chain, absorbing up to 2 greys and dying 25 days later from the acute radiation syndrome. Rufus, aka the Demon Core, was set to be used at Bikini Atoll during a live test, but missed the chance, instead being melted down and used to create other cores. It's even possible some were used in our episode 3-star, the Nevada Proving Grounds, outside Las Vegas. From the album Forbidden Science of the Western States by artist Phantom Astronaut, my song pairing for this story is The Demon Core, a song sampling a range of audio around nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. If you enjoy the song, the entire album is well worth a listen too. Thursday, May 22nd. On this day, not year, 172 runners start the race. Only 151 finish the race alive. An ultramarathon is a bit of an undefined race length, the label being slapped on any foot race that is longer than the traditional 42.195 kilometre or 26-mile and 308.5-yard marathon race. Some clock in at 50 kilometres or 31 miles, while others reach all the way just shy of 5,000 kilometres or 3,100 miles, really putting the ultra into ultramarathon. Our ultramarathon today was to be made up of 3 parts: a 5 kilometre or 3.1 mile run, a half marathon, and then a 100 kilometre or 62 mile trail run through a mountainous region. This was the 4th annual Beijing Ultramarathon of 2021. The 100-kilometre leg of the ultramarathon was to take runners through the Yellow River Stone Forest of Jingtai County, rated 4.7 from 22 reviews on TripAdvisor.com. Calvin Chong describes the location as awesome, amazing, mind-blowing, incredibly exotic, while Kodo Drummer states, "This nature-created forest is comprised of many different-sized and unique-shaped, beautiful stalagmites, stone pillars, and cliffs." While photos on the website show the area to be very rocky, with the terrain barren and steep, it wasn't going to be an easy run, with the winding path taking the runners up well above sea level and leaving them exposed to the elements, which, as most of the runners are only wearing shorts and a t-shirt, could lead to some very chilly conditions. Fortunately, as the race was setting to start at 9 a.m, the sun was shining down, and although a chilly breeze was in the air, the sun was warming the runners up. This wouldn't last. As the runners ate away at the miles, distinctive groups were formed. Many trailed behind, lagging on the rough terrain, but a handful of the 172 competitors were dominating the terrain. This leading group contained Liang Jing, nicknamed Liang the Legend by other runners, or General Liang by fans. He was one of China's best ultramarathon runners, winning the 400-kilometre Gobi Desert Ultramarathon 3 years prior in 2018. The leading pack contained some of the better runners in the marathon, and as they pulled ahead between 24 to 36 kilometres or 15 to 22 miles into the race, they found themselves steadily gaining altitude through the stone forest until they were 2,000 metres or 6,500 feet above sea level. This is also when disaster struck, and the weather took a turn for the worse. As wind reached speeds up to 88 kilometers or 55 miles per hour, the apparent temperature, the temperature that the human body perceives, dropped to -5 degrees Celsius or 23 Fahrenheit. Runner Liu Liu Nanfang recalls, "The wind wrapped around the raindrops, hitting my face like dense bullets. It really hurt. I couldn't open my eyes in the strong wind." Another runner sharing a similar experience. "The rain started to mix with hail and kept smashing into my face, and my eyes started getting obscured and blurry." It was even reported that graupel, a form of soft hail created when supercooled droplets of water freeze onto falling snow, was forming and falling on the runners. Zhang Zushen, mayor of Beijing, stated, "In a short period of time, hailstones and freezing rain fell in the area, and there were strong winds. The temperatures dropped sharply." Part of the equipment the runners were to carry was an emergency blanket for cold weather. But these blankets were shredded by the wind and hail, ripped away from numbed hands, or just couldn't be opened at all in the conditions present. Those that were furthest behind hadn't ascended the steeper sections of the mountain yet, and were able to safely turn away or shelter in place, while those who had been leading, Liang and the others, were trapped. No shelter, no protection, and the risk of hypothermia rising by the minute. Ironically, the ideal body condition for an ultramarathon runner was working against them, as the lowered body fat offered less protection in the freezing conditions. The hours crawled by, and as the storm front abated, many runners were still missing. Around 1,200 people, from officials to locals to motorbike riders and even shepherds, joined in the rescue attempt, often having to trek for hours at a time to reach parts of the track inaccessible by car, while others used drones equipped with thermal cameras to search for the missing runners. By the following day, all the runners had been accounted for, including the 21 who had died during the storm. As per a Vice.com article, the deceased included a 25-year-old newlywed accountant, a 34-year-old hearing-impaired running champion, a 25-year-old ethnic Kyrgyz firefighter, a 50-year-old vegetable vendor, and 31-year-old champion Liang, whose daughter will turn 2 in July. Despite the government offering compensation to the families of those who had died, public reaction was that of anger. Anger at the event organizers for allowing the ultramarathon to go ahead, despite weather warnings the day prior, and anger at the government for not regulating the sudden rise and interest in such races around the country. Many of those involved in organizing the ultramarathon were found guilty and jailed, with terms lasting between 3 to 5 years. Ain't nothing gonna break my stride. Nobody gonna slow me down. Oh no, I got to keep on moving. My song pairing for this story is the, I think, rather fitting Break My Stride by Matthew Wilder. Friday, May 23rd. On this day, not year, a judge receives judgment. Sicily, the ball to Italy's boot, home to the Valley of the Temples, birthplace of the cannoli, inhabited for over 16,000 years. But, towards the end of the 20th century, it was facing a dire problem. Cosa Nostra, i.e., the Sicilian Mafia. It's thought by some that the Mafia emerged from lemons. Not in a Cabbage Patch Kid kind of way, something more symbiotic. Lemon groves around Sicily were a big investment, but also a necessity to provide the scurvy-scrubbing vitamin C sailors required. Unfortunately, the farmers growing the lemons are at the mercy of local gangs in a kind of "cough up the citrus or we break your trees" transaction. Although the gangs also offered to protect some orchids for a price, of course. The local gangs realized profiting off the hard work of others was more lucrative, and so got into politics. Sorry, organized crime, what's the difference? Over the next couple of centuries, the mafia influence grew. They infiltrated government offices around the country, or otherwise had people on the take. After World War II, a couple of mafia men embedded themselves in the rebuilding effort and embezzled funds. The ABC of Australia referred to the Sicilian Mafia as one of the most infamous criminal organisations in the world, responsible for murders, torture, drug and arms trafficking, and political corruption. Nobody was willing to stand up to them. Well, almost nobody. Giovanni Falcone, born 18th of May 1939 in Palermo, Sicily, would go on to study law at university and eventually become a judge and prosecuting magistrate. Giovanni was one of the few judges in Sicily who would openly go after the mafia. He was part of the anti-mafia pool, a group out of Palermo, Sicily, that survived as soldiers of fortune. If you have a problem, if no one else can help, and if you can find them, maybe you can hire the anti-mafia team. Well, most of that covers Giovanni and his team anyway. Their big break came in 1982, when Tommaso Buscetta, a high-ranked mafia member, turned on the mafia after his sons were disappeared, never to be seen again. With Tommaso working with Giovanni and the anti-mafia pool, they were able to lay charges against 475 mafia members in a trial lasting from 1986 to 1992, held in a special reinforced bunker courthouse. During this time, the security procedures surrounding Giovanni were quite intense. He was under 24-hour surveillance, travelled in armoured cars, and was escorted by armed guards. In 1989, explosives were found near his summer home, and he spent the remainder of his time there sleeping with a gun. But, eventually, all the hard work, paranoia, and threats to his personal safety paid off. The Maxi trial, as it had been termed, finished. By the end of the trial, 338 people had been charged and sentenced to a combined 2,665 years behind bars. The Mafia didn't take this defeat lying down, and Salvatore Riina, chief of the Sicilian Mafia, put a hit out on Giovanni Falcone, which concluded on this day, May 23rd, in 1992. Returning from Rome, Giovanni and his wife were met at the airport by his police escort, 3 armoured cars in brown, white and blue. At 5:50 p.m, they leave the airport. 8 minutes later, 5 would be dead. Hidden beneath a section of the A29 highway were 13 drums, carefully positioned by wheeling them down on a skateboard and holding between 400 to 1,000 kilograms of TNT and other explosives, depending on which source you read. The explosives were connected to a wireless detonator held by mobster Giovanni Brusca. As the procession of cars drew nearer, Brusca detonated the explosives. The lead car was right on top of the device, and as the road split in a thundering explosion, resembling the crater of a volcano to some later witnesses, The car was hurled off the road and into a grove of trees, killing the 3 policemen within. The second car, the one containing Giovanni Falcone and his wife, Francesca, crashed, and the couple who hadn't been wearing seatbelts were ejected from the car, killing them. The third car, despite being battered and broken in the explosion, held together, and the 4 police inside survived. As news reached Salvatore Rina, he celebrated by ordering champagne. Francesca had become the first female magistrate killed by the mafia, while Giovanni became a symbol, standing up to the organised crime gangs even at the cost of his own life. Parliament ordered a day of mourning in his honour, and the government, driven to action by the anger of the public, created new, stronger anti-mafia laws that didn't eliminate the crime gangs, but did stem their overt actions. Salvatore Rina was captured the following year, received 26 life sentences, served in solitary confinement, and passed away in 2017. I struggled to find a fitting pairing for this story, but I think I've made a decent choice in this Louis Prima cover of "I'll be glad when you're dead, you rascal you." Something I'm sure the Sicilian Mafia thought often about Falcone and all those that stood up to them. Saturday, May 24th. On this day, not year, France receives a judgment. Wine has been brewed all over the world for thousands of years. It's made on every continent, even Antarctica, although some believe that they do it better than others. Vin, as it's called in French, is often regarded as some of the best, with many believing France to be the centre of the wine world. With world-famous regions such as Bordeaux, Burgundy, Brittany, and, of course, the designated origin of, and the only country legally able to create the drink named after this region, Champagne. Our story today takes place in France, but French wines aren't the star. For this story, we find ourselves in Paris, in the Intercontinental Le Grand Hôtel. Since opening in 1862, the hotel had played host to many a royal and celebrity, and seen even more meetings and gossip between its walls, and by the end of the day would be host to quite the historical upset. 11 French persons were seated around a table inside the hotel, and while they all come from different backgrounds and workplaces, one thing united them all: wine. Seated around the table are a member of the Wine Institute of France, a head chef and owner of a 3 Michelin star restaurant, food and wine critics, a member of the Controlled Designation of Origin Board, just to name a few. Not taking part in the event, but recording, was an American journalist, writing everything down. They had all gathered that day for a single reason: a wine tasting. Although French wines were present, they weren't the real reason why the story is still remembered today, having been written down as a book and even turned into a movie starring Alan Rickman. No, the reason all had gathered was to taste wines from America. Part of what is referred to as the New World in the wine industry, America was a relative newcomer to the wine scene, only having started growing grapes for wine in the 1500s. Then, during Prohibition from 1920 to 1933, the American wine industry, despite some creative attempts to get some home fermentable grape juice into people's hands, took a nosedive. The industry had only just recovered around the year this story takes place, 1976, but the reputation of American wine wasn't one that set oenophiles, or wine lovers, giddy with delight on seeing a bottle for sale. So, when Englishman Stephen Spurrier, whose Oeno creds included the French-based Cave de la Madeleine wine shop and a school hosting a 6-week wine course, sent out the invitations to try these American wines from Napa Valley, California, the creme de la creme showed up. It wasn't just going to be a regular wine tasting, however. This was going to be a blind tasting. 6 American white wines, ranging from 1972 to 1974, and 4 French white Burgundies, from 72 to 73. They would then move on to 6 American reds, a Cabernet Sauvignon 1969 to 1973, and again, 4 French red Bordeauxs, from 70 to 71. The 11 guests were to go through each wine, not knowing which was which, and score it out of 20, based on criteria of their own choosing. One of the only people in the room who knew what each drink was the journalist. Their article of the event, published weeks later in Time magazine, reading, "More often the panel was confused. Ah, back to France!" exclaimed Oliver after sipping a 1972 Chardonnay from Napa Valley, one of the American wines. "This is definitely of California. It has no nose," said another judge after downing a Batard Montrachet 73, a French wine. As the scores for the white wines were read out, it was America first, French second, America third and fourth. The room was stunned. Then came the reds. America first, with France in second, third, and fourth. But that was inconsequential. The French had been bested, hoisted by their own vineyards, as it were. Furious, one of the judges attempted to retrieve their scores, only to storm out of the room when they were denied. This event has since become known as the Judgment of Paris, a play on the Trojan Judgment of Paris. This wasn't the final testing either. Some argued that the French wines would cellar better, would age finer. So, 10 years later, the test was done again, using just the red wines. America now came first and second. 30 years after the initial test was done, the event was recreated with wines from the same year. Now America took out the top 5 spots. France had been resting on their laurels for too long, and the world had caught up, and in many ways surpassed them in wine. My song pairing for this story, I feel, is a little lazy. I could have looked for a nice song about an underdog triumphing. Just take it as read, that's what I did the next time you hear such a song. Instead, let me pair this story with the band Big Bad Voodoo Daddy and their cover of Gimme That Wine. Sunday, May 25th. On this day, not year, and for my next impression, Jesse Owens. A quickfire Sunday for a quick man. In a world of some 8.2 billion people, it's rare for your average person to set a world record, let alone break one. While the Guinness Book of World Records keeps detailed statistics, some records, once made, aren't going to be broken anytime soon. Like the most bubbles blown in 30 seconds, with a live tarantula in your mouth. 292, for those wondering. However, back on this day, in 1935, an event that has since been coined the greatest 45 minutes in sport occurred, where not 1, not 2, not even 3, but 4 world records were made or tied. James Cleveland Owens, born September 12, 1913, was the youngest child out of 10. He gained the nickname Jesse after a teacher asked his name, to which he responded J and C, which sounded like Jesse, JC. His love for running started at school, and his junior high school track coach allowed him to practice before school started. Fast forward to 1935, Jesse, now 22 years old, is just a few days from competing in the Big Ten Conference Track and Field Championship. Only 5 days before the event is to take place, he fell down some stairs in his dormitory at university and badly injured his back. Leading up to the event, he had to be helped in and out of cars and was in so much pain that his coach nearly pulled him from the event entirely. But as the day arrived, as he was standing on the track just before the race started, his pain, he states, disappeared as if by a miracle. Then Jesse put on a few miracles of his own. In 45 minutes, Jesse Owens had set records in long jump, 8.13 meters, the 220-yard or 201-meter dash, 20.3 seconds, the 220-yard low hurdles, 22.6 seconds, and tied the record for the 100-yard or 91-meter dash with 9.4 seconds. Although, controversially, he may have run that race in 9.3 seconds, beating the record, but the final time given was based on the slowest recorded time from multiple stopwatches, and while more than half showed 9.3, they had to go with 9.4 seconds. 4 records in less time than it takes to listen to this episode of TDNY. That's more than impressive. I'm a shooting star leaping through the sky, like a tiger, defying the laws of gravity. Long jump and hurdles? I'm a racing car, passing by, like Lady Godiva. I'm gonna go, go, go. There's no stopping me. 100-yard and 220-yard dash. Don't Stop Me Now by Queen is my song pairing for this story, for a fairly obvious reason. Right, pens and paper at the ready, as we're moving right into the quiz. Question 1 for Monday. A simple geography question for you. Tell me 2 states that make up the New England area of America. Question 2 for Tuesday. What's the term used for people found preserved in peat? Question 3 for Wednesday. Originally known as Rufus, what new name was the plutonium core called after the 2 deaths it had caused? Question 4 for Thursday. As per TripAdvisor.com, what is the Yellow River Stone Forest rated out of 5? Question 5 for Friday. What fruit is thought to be responsible for creating the mafia? Question 6 for Saturday. Starting with an O, what is a wine lover called? Question 7 for Sunday. What 2 letters gave Jesse Owens his nickname? Right. Have you got something down for all of them? If not, go back, listen again. You know the drill. Right, answers. Answer 1 for Monday. The 6 states that make up New England are Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. If you have any of those 2 down, well done. Answer 2 for Tuesday. The term for bodies found in peat are bog bodies. Answer 3 for Wednesday. Rufus was later referred to as the Demon Core. Answer 4 for Thursday. You will find the Yellow River Stone Forest rated 4.7 out of 5. Answer 5 for Friday. The Mafia were created, some think, because of lemons. Answer 6 for Saturday. A wine lover is an oenophile. O-E-N-O phile. Although originally the word supposedly meant someone who drunk excessively. And answer 7 for Sunday. Jesse Owens got his nickname from the letters J.C. J.C. Owens. And my friends, that is it for another week. I hope you've had fun along the way, learned something new and interesting, and can now go pester your friends, family, co-workers with all this new knowledge. As ever, if you have enjoyed this episode and are feeling particularly extroverted today, I'd appreciate it if you could share it with friends and family to help the podcast grow. Or, failing that, I'd be more than happy with a rate and a comment. If I've made any glaring mistakes, and I'm so sorry to any physicists that stumble onto my horrible radiation understanding, or if you just want to reach out to me, I can be contacted on thisdaynotyear@gmail.com. So, join me again next week, where we'll be looking at the 26th of May to, the 1st of June. Until then, I hope you all stay well and have an historic week. Toodles.